Hi guys, my name is Barinada Alexei Anacho, a startup legal expert and founder of Barinada Legal. In this video, I'm going to share with you meanwhile there are more than 5 reasons, but I'll just share 5 legal reasons why a startup may need to pivot. And then after the video, you would get to understand that pivoting may be just what you need to do at the moment instead of struggling. So it's not such a bad idea to pivot. When you're done with this video, you would understand why. But let's get started, right? Before we get started, let's understand what pivoting means. So to pivot means to move from your area of focus to another area, to move from your area of specialty to another area, right? So let's say you started out on a particular path, on fintech path, for example, and then all of a sudden you realize that you will not be able to meet up as a fintech company, or you're not going to get the best out of being a fintech company, and so you now decide that you want to go into agri-tech, for example. Now that is you pivoting, and that has a significant impact on the company and its stakeholders. So it needs to be done in a certain kind of way. There has to be certain legal steps that you've taken before you can do that, before you can actually pivot. Otherwise, you're going to have problems down the line. So before we get into the 5 things that you can do, I love the number 5 so much because, if you've gotten 5 reasons or 5 points for doing something or for not doing something, then that means that it's really something not worth doing or something worth doing, as the case may be. So I am going to actually talk about 5 ways or 5 legal things that you can do if you're considering pivoting. However, in this particular video, we'll be looking at 5 legal reasons why you may need to pivot. Now, I am putting the word legal in it because I need you to understand that you may have other reasons for pivoting, and I really have no business with that. It's not that's not why I'm making this video. Now, I'm a lawyer, a startup focused lawyer, and I basically help startup founders to remain legally compliant and protect their interest, while they're building their startup. So I have discovered that there are legal reasons why a startup may need to pivot. So if you're looking for a reason to pivot, you want to make sure that these reasons or your reasons for pivoting also cover the legal reasons that I'm going to mention, right? So without much delay, let's get into the reasons. 5 legal reasons why you may need to pivot your startup or pivot into something else. Number 1, change in regulations. A change in regulation may require you to pivot. Let's say that, Nigeria is one funny country where something can be legit today, can be a valid business model today, and by tomorrow you wake up and there is a law or there is a new policy, a new regulation that is banning that. We know how it has been here. We know how logistics companies are struggling to even still remain relevant. We know how the go-karter businesses, other ride-hailing companies, that's bike-hailing companies that started out, where are they today? They are nowhere because of regulatory compliance issues or because of change. In fact, not even necessarily regulatory compliance is a different thing, because of change in regulations or change in policies or change in laws. Now, what the smart ones did was to pivot immediately. So you see, pivoting may be a good strategy in the event that there is a change in policy or change in laws. So as against just packing up and leaving, you might want to consider pivoting into something else. At least you're still in business, but just that your business model or your focus or your industry has now changed by reason of that change in regulation. I hope that you got that right. Now, the second reason why you may need to pivot is when you're having disputes over your intellectual property. Now, I love startups so much because they're a very unique set of entrepreneurs, and I consider them a very vulnerable set of entrepreneurs. I also consider that they have peculiar legal needs, and that's why you can never gauge their legal needs with that of a traditional small business owner. Trust me, a traditional small business owner may not necessarily be concerned about some of the points that I'm going to raise in this video, but Because I mean, they can just wake up one day, the person was selling bags, and the next thing he decides, okay, I don't want to sell bags again, and I want to go into foodstuff business. He doesn't need any form of, legal serere to make that happen. He just makes the decision and he moves. But not you, the startup founder, right? There are stakeholders whose interest will be affected one way or the other if you wake up one morning and change your business. So you want to be sure that the reasons behind changing or pivoting, is valid enough. You want to be sure that the reason is valid enough, right? So intellectual property disputes may be one valid reason why you will need to pivot. If you find that maybe, for example, it has to do with trademark disputes, you're using a brand name that has already been used by someone else, and that ultimately means that you're sharing your market, you're sharing your brand identifiers with people, with a competitor. It could be that they started out before you and you didn't know about their existence, and then you started branding, under that particular name or that particular logo, whatever it is. The moment you realize, or the moment there's a dispute over who owns that intellectual property or that logo or that trademark, then there may be a need for you to drop it. Now, dropping it may also mean you pivoting into something else, right? Because you're using a different brand name now, or you're using a different identifier. So away from trademark issues, there may also be, say, issues about software licensing. So maybe you're using a particular license software without licensing, without getting the proper license from the creator, from the owner of the software. That may be one reason for you to stop operations or for you to pivot into something else. So the reasons why you actually eventually pivot may also be the same reason why someone else who has refused to pivot will go out of business. So you, being the smart entrepreneur, decide to pivot into something else as against just going out. So intellectual property dispute is one legal reasons why a startup may need to pivot. Now, IP is a core part of every tech startup. Like, it's part of your assets, your intangible assets. Because even when they are doing valuation for the company, they're going to value both physical and intangible assets. So yes, it's a reason, or it can be a valid reason for you to want to pivot. Your contractual obligations is also the third reason why you may need to pivot. Now, you may have entered into contracts with some persons or some company or organization, and a clause or a term or a provision in the contract makes it impossible for you to start off. Let's say before starting out or before launching your startup, you worked in an organization that had like a 3-year non-compete clause, right? A clause that says that you cannot start or you cannot work in the competitive industry within the next 3 years after leaving us, and you have only just left and now you want to start. You've built a team and everything, and it is in the same industry. The moment the issue is raised, it may be a reason for you to pivot, to move into something else. So aside from contractual obligations, see, you're a startup for a reason. You're always going to interact with other people, other stakeholders, investors, clients, customers, and you maintain your relationship with all of those persons with contracts and agreements. Now, you may have a dispute with any of those parties, right? And arising out of the contract you've entered with them. Now, this contract or this dispute may be so severe that it disrupts the entire process of the business of the company. That may be a reason to pivot, especially if the dispute has to do with the service itself or the product for which you're starting out with. Another reason why you may need to, of course, pivot is a change in market demand. Now, this may not exactly be a legal reason, but that is as valid as any of the reasons above. And in fact, that's most likely one of the main reasons why a lot of founders consider, even before considering the legal reasons, they consider change in market demand as a good enough reason for them to pivot into something else. So if they notice that, there is a fall in demand for this particular product, or they notice that, this particular product that we're developing will not do well in this particular region or at this particular time of the year, they might want to pivot into something else that does better at a later time or in a different location. So that's one of the things that you want to consider. Then, of course, there is a lot of key partners, like the key people that you work with. Let's say that you're a tech startup, right? And you depend on a particular company. You're a fintech. You depend on a particular company for your API. You depend on a particular sector, a particular startup for your technology, the technology you use to deliver your product or your service to your audience. The day that other company ceases to exist, it means that your key technology partners are no longer in business. So how can you still be in business? That may be one reason for you to pivot, right? So you always need to be aware of what is happening. You always have to know what's going on. And I'm going to tell you that it is not just about having a valid reason. It's important to establish what these reasons are so that you can clearly communicate the reason why you're pivoting to the company stakeholders. Stakeholders are people who have key interest in the company. So they're not going to take no for an answer, especially when you have investors. Investors have, first of all, aside from the fact that they invested in the team, they also invested in the product, they invested in the idea. So if the reason they invested is no longer there, it gives them the option to say, we want out, right? So you want to be sure that whatever decision that you're taking with respect to the company, including the decision to pivot, have been clearly communicated. But before you communicate that, you want to also be sure that there is an actual legal reason why it has become necessary for you to pivot. Another reason why you may need to pivot, and this is a very important one, is financing, right? Funding. Now, one of the reasons why a lot of startups struggle is because of they do not have access to finance. There's no investor yet. Nobody has trusted or believed in the idea enough to fund them. And even when they get fundings, they are not really significant and they can't push them really far. So depending on your industry, depending on where you're working, your products, what industry your product is in, you may need to pivot because the financial requirement for being in that industry, you're unable to meet it. Why? Because the kind of financing you need, the amount of money you need to raise from an investor, you haven't been able to raise it yet. So there might be a need to pivot into something else that you can easily reach. Think about it like the low-hanging fruits. Before you are able to take the bigger fruits or the fruits that are hanging far away, you want to see the ones that your hands can easily reach. And this is where this comes to play. So the 5 reasons why you're pivoting must come from any of these things I've mentioned. Of course, again, there is also, I've talked about loss of key partners, I've talked about change in market demand, I've talked about intellectual property dispute, I've talked about funding. There is also issues of competitions. Competition is good, healthy competition is good. However, a particular industry may be so tight, and so competitive that a new startup that is just starting out may not be able to thrive, especially if it does not have, if it lacks the capacity in terms of finance, in terms of marketing and all of that. So it may just find that there is a need to pivot into something else. A particular industry has become so saturated and you suddenly feel like, okay, I don't think we can do so well here, let's move to something else. That also can be an issue. Now, another big reason why a lot of startups may need to pivot, and this is not just for startups in the early stage, even growth startups that have scaled, that have launched, scaled, even though they are seed funding or their Series A, may still pivot if there is a merger and an acquisition, right? If they merge with another company, then a new identity is born. And with the new identity that is born, they may have to set up new businesses or go into a new business other than what they were doing before. That could be another reason to pivot. Also, if they get acquired by a company or another company, which is usually the main prayer of a lot of founders, if they get acquired by another company, then there may be a need for them to pivot. So you see, pivoting is not such a bad idea. Pivoting is not such a horrible idea. As a matter of fact, pivoting may just be what you need in order to really scale your business, your startup. So if you're still struggling, sometimes a lot of founders don't like to pivot because they're too in love with their idea. They're so in love with the idea that even though they see that it is not really working, they believe so much in it that they are unwilling to try something else. Pivoting may be good for you and may be good for your investors. It may also be good for the employees who work with you. However, it has to follow due process. And in my next video, I'm going to share with you, I think I shared more than 5 reasons why you could, pivot. 5 legal reasons why you could pivot. I shared more than 5. I shared about 8 reasons. In my next video, I'm going to be sharing with you another 5 ways or 5 legal steps, 5 legal actions that you need to take before you can pivot. I hope you got value from this. My name is Barinada Alexi Anacho. I am a startup focused lawyer, and my friend BL helps innovative startups like you to maintain regulatory compliance, cover their legal basis, and help them to actually build a profitable and a legally protected business. So if you'd like us to provide legal support to your startups, please feel free to fill the form below this video. Just tell us about your startup, tell us what you do, and then we'll take it up from there.